grounding meditation before we begin our program. Deborah.
Welcome, everybody. We're so pleased that you're here. And I want to let you know, in my world, you belong today. You belong here with us. And as a way of bringing us into one breath and belonging together, we're just going to take a couple of minutes just to arrive into this Zoom room, into this space, and into this fearless community for this afternoon. So just noticing where you are in your space and noticing just around you. Having a look around your space, taking your eye away from the screen, and just noticing your current environment that you're in, and giving thanks for a place where you belong and where you are now. And now, if it's available and comfortable to you, you can just let your eyes rest away from the screen and rest away from all of the stimulus you can see around you. And just listen in to my voice. I am so pleased that you are here. Thank you for arriving. So just give yourself a little thanks for taking this moment to be together in this community, to listen in to cultures of belonging. And just take a breath in to anchor yourself into this moment and into this conversation. Now staying connected to breath, just noticing when you breathe in that you're filling in your inside space. So just tuning in to the fullness of your inside space. Allowing your belly to be expansive as you breathe in. Allowing your heart to be open. Allowing your mind to be soft. And breathing now into the center of your chest, into your heart space. And if it's available to you, placing a hand over your heart space. And just feel as you breathe that it moves your hand. And just tune into your heart space. From this place of attunement into our heart space, just tune into your sense of belonging. Is there maybe a memory there, a story, a favorite place or community where you know you belong? Or does it bring up memories of a time when you didn't belong? Our hearts have very deep, long, amazing memories, and they can be access points for us. So breathing now into that heart space and affirming to yourself, I have arrived, and now, today, in this moment, I belong here in this conversation. And with your hand still on your heart, opening your eyes, staying connected to breath, and then just noticing who you can see on the screen, and just maybe giving them a bit of a wink, making eye contact through the screen, giving them a sense of not only do I belong, but you do as well. Welcome everybody to a beautiful fearless chat of belonging.
I was yazzing on mute. Yes. Yaz. I love when I Yaz on mute, my computer's like, you're muted. Like I get, it's like, I feel like my computer screams at me. Welcome all to Fearless Chat 25. For those of you who this may be your first time in our space, my name is Eduardo Placer. I am the founder of Fearless Communicators. I am a story doula. I identify as a gay cisgender male. I am Latinx, Cuban American, son of multi-generational immigrants who fled fascism, who fled communism, and landed on American soil. With the privilege of being the founder of Fearless Communicators, what we have the privilege of doing is working with thought leaders on what they say and how they say it. And when we found ourselves in mid-March amidst the COVID-19 outbreak, like many people displaced, I live in Brooklyn and I haven't been home since early March. I am currently in Miami Beach at my parents' apartment. We were left with a question, what do we do now? So what we did immediately was created a space for our community to gather around the thought leadership of our experts. So our first expert is actually on this call, Dr. Kelly Jennings. Hi, Dr. Kelly Jennings, who led a conversation on what else we can do besides washing our hands right now, as a healer, as a naturopathic doctor. And then, we've had an array of conversations around selling in this climate for business owners. Also, we had conversations around new ideas that were emerging. How do we pivot? New products that we offer. How do we show up in service? What stories are relevant to be sharing in this moment to our audience? So we were in these conversations. We were also in a conversation around mental health, which is another pandemic that we are currently living through, which no one is really speaking about, or they're like murmurings of it. And then after the death of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade and George Floyd, felt compelled in the listening of that to pivot our conversations around our relationship to race and racism. And then we were moving into conversations around workplace and the workforce. And I just think it's so fitting and beautiful to be in this conversation with a dear, dear friend of mine and of our Fearless community, Surabhi Lal. She is many things, and we accept her manyness in this space, the full expression of her manyness. She is a storyteller, she is a leader, she is one of the people whose biggest hearts shows up in how she shows up to lead in the spaces that she has the privilege of leading. We have a partnership with Luminary where she serves as Chief Impact Officer, which is again an expression of her love and our gratitude to be in that space in a shared commitment of elevating women's voices. She's also in the faculty at NYU. She's also a mom, an amazing mom. Her son I don't know if your son may appear at some points, if he does, we welcome him. And he has a fabulous mask collection that sometimes also appear so Batman may appear on our screens, which we will receive and welcome when he comes. So with all of that as a context, it is my pleasure to introduce Surabhi Lal as we have this conversation about how we create cultures of belonging. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Surabhi Lal.
Thank you, Eduardo. I've been thinking about how our protests that we're seeing are really a sense of agency, public agency, over a cry of people feeling like they don't belong. And I think that this framing to me makes a lot of sense because I have toggled between being the only in many rooms that I sit, and certainly at many tables, I'm the only person who looks like me, and this idea of belonging. And what I have done for my professional career, along with everything else, is create communities. And you can't create a really good community without thinking about belonging. So Eduardo, I was telling you earlier, I so appreciated your story that went out with this about being in elementary school. And I think for a lot of us, it is that elementary school or middle school or high school where we realize this tension between, am I going to fit in and belong or not? And some of us have the privilege of fitting in because we might grow up in a homogenous place. I, until 5th grade, grew up in a place where almost everyone looked different. So there was a feeling of belonging because none of us looked like each other. And then I moved where I was the only person who looked like me. We can get into the trauma about moving in 5th grade at a different point. But what it taught me is that we can really create these cultures of belonging, and we have to be careful about that. We have to be thoughtful, we have to be intentional. And as we do that, we need to not cross the line of belonging becoming everybody looking and thinking like everyone else. So my question to us is, how do we create these cultures of belonging where everybody is engaged? Eduardo.
Oh my God. I was like, I just want to ponder that one again, because I feel like that is almost like a cultural shift around this idea of belonging that we've witnessed in our lifetime. Like I'm 43, and I feel like growing up, there was a generational aspiration to shed everything that made me individual or different, to join. All of the belonging meant shedding everything that was mine and appropriating everything that wasn't mine to belong to the majority, right? And I love that this is a different shift. Is like, is there room in belonging where we can all be belonging with all of our there's room for all of our difference in the belonging, which I
Yeah,
think
and that
really
this isn't right. Assimilation was, I think, when I hear you talk about
that's
that, I
the
think
word.
about this idea of
Yeah.
assimilating, and we need to all be the same, and we need to conform. And frankly, if we needed to conform, then it really wouldn't be interesting. And certainly the stories that come out of this community and other communities wouldn't be as rich and wonderful and engaging as they are. So how do we create this sense of community and belonging where everybody can be their whole selves? And so for me, I think about this in terms of engage. So I
I'm
want to, before we get into
curious.
the engage, yeah,
I'm curious to dig in a little bit, just because there are many spaces where you generate this conversation, right? So I think that there's the hat that you wear, in work you do at the Chief Impact work that you do at Luminary, which is a women's entrepreneurship business owner space. But you also do this as a teacher, right? So you're also molding young minds that are emerging. And then there's also your own personal journey in this narrative through your education and your preparation. I'm just curious what you've tracked as someone who, because you are a futurist, you do talk about the future of work. Like, what I would love is just like a context of like, where were we and where are we going, perhaps.
sure. So for me and my story, I'm an only in lots of ways. I'm an only child. I am the only one in my generation and my family to grow up in the US, but spent a lot of my summers in India. So was amongst a group of cousins who I'm very, very close to, but was also an only. So I held this tension of being an only and of belonging for as long as I can remember. And so that's really informed the work that I do and the spaces I inhabit, of thinking about how do we make somebody not feel like their onlyness is bad, but how do we really make their onlyness be this amazing, wonderful thing about them? And how do we welcome that into the space? And so when I think about what it means to be an only, I actually want to ask all of us, what does it feel like when you don't belong? So if we can have some people put that into the chat, that would be amazing. What does it feel like when you don't belong?
I shared how I felt in the email,
Eduardo feels shitty.
which I felt shitty.
Physically uncomfortable,
Yeah.
lonely. It makes me wonder where I belong, right? So these are all these questions that, like, nothing you do is right. For most of us, that only feeling is really, it is lonely. It is hard. And I think when we dig into that feeling of loneliness, and for me, when I dig into that feeling, I think, how can I make a space? How can I engage with other people so that they don't feel that? Because I don't want to feel that just because.
I'm wondering too, Surbi, because I think some of the belonging in the not, but I wonder if some of it is also instinct. Like, I wonder if there's a piece of it that's instinct and then there's stuff that's told, but I feel like from my experience as someone who identifies as gay, like, there were things that I just knew I couldn't say.
Mm.
Like, I just knew that the saying of that was dangerous. And I don't know if that's just protection, like the body just knew, don't say that, don't speak. And the ways in which I guess I silence myself, and that's maybe why I'm in the healing work that I do now around people and their stories. But I think that because there are ways in which the external world is communicating something to us. And then there's also like an impulse and an instinct internally that's also saying, be careful, you don't belong here.
That's right. I think we all have this fight or flight, right? So I think about this, you're saying in terms of workplaces. And I think about it in this way. If I am in a workplace where I feel like I have to do that, the workplace, myself and my colleagues are not getting my best work. Because half of my work or part of my work is being spent thinking about, I can't say that. Can I really say that? Should I say that? Instead of focusing on what might we be able to do collectively in a space of work. And so I think the same thing about teaching in a classroom. When I think about a classroom and I'm in the classroom, the first conversations we have in the class are around what are our agreements? What are they going to look like? How do we pull ideas from each other so that we can all learn? And it doesn't mean we don't disagree. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be nervous at some point to say something, but that if we can bring ourselves in and not have to have that voice of, do I belong? Should I say this? Should I not say this? That we can actually get to a place where we do say that. And in management speak, people would call this psychological safety. So there is this idea that there's trust within a workplace or a group. And a lot of, there's actually a great session from Adam Grant where he's interviewing Trevor Noah about how the writers in the Daily Show need to have this idea of psychological safety, because there's no other way that they could say that's a lousy idea if they didn't have that trust and genuine care for one another. So I would say in that sense, you want to think about it in terms of they have a culture of belonging, they have a show to do, they're really excited about it. And I think about this in terms of the community at Luminary or the community in my classroom, or even at a dinner party. I want everybody, when are we going to have those again? I don't know. But at a dinner party where we can, where you do want to do things like introductions. You don't want somebody to feel like they're not invited in.
Yeah.
So part of that is, how do we invite people in?
Beautiful. And I love, Luana wrote, there's the I don't belong here, but then there's also, they don't know I belong here. Right? Like, I love the two-way piece of that, like that I love that framing. So I know that you have a tool for us that we're going to go through. And the invitation, there are going to be some questions that she's going to have us ponder. And the invitation is to use the chat as we walk through this to engage with the question. And then I'll share. And then if we have some time at the end, we may engage for some hot seats or an opportunity for people to raise a specific question about this emergence to be directly in relationship with Surbi. Okay, so Surbi, let's jump on in.
Great. So I would say I started thinking about this as a framework when we were maybe a month into COVID and into quarantine. And I was thinking about this in terms of how do we engage remote teams? And as I thought about it more, I thought this isn't just about remote teams. This is about how do we engage on a day-to-day? So the E is about empathy. And what does that mean for you? How do you get in touch with your empathy? So one of the questions that I want to ask this group to think about is, how do you listen to understand? So how, when you are talking with somebody, do you listen to understand where they are and not to respond, give advice, say, move on, all of the things that we might do, particularly if we're busy. So how do you listen to understand the person you're talking to?
Great. So let's give people about a minute or so to kind of reflect, and then we'll see what happens in the chat. I have my answer. I love Susan, number one. Don't interrupt. Yes. Dr. Kelly, when I really listen, I'm allowing whatever this person is saying to potentially shatter me. Ooh. Yancy, mirror back, repeat what they said. I like to breathe. I focus on my breath and I slow down. Like there's like I think I come from a Cuban interrupty culture, very Caribbean. It's like, meh. It's like, let me slow down here and breathe. Listen for the things they are not saying to get a deeper understanding. Renata. Ben, figure out what's happening beneath what they're saying and what they really need to be heard. Luana, I must tell myself I'm not going to advise, fix, or interrupt. And Lorena writes, if I listen to someone of a differing opinion, I try to breathe and check my bodily response so I can check it. Yeah, I feel like I'm in relation to the body. Karen, tell myself to stay curious. Beautiful.
It's so striking to me that all of this is work, right? We think about listening as very passive, but all of it, I mean, if we read all of these, none of this is passive. Sometimes it's about slowing your own self, right? Putting your own things to the side and really listening. And, you know, Eduardo, you said you just have to slow yourself down. That's a very physical response to need to do that.
There's some other good ones. So Allie says nonverbal intuition of reading between the lines. Susie said number 2, to not think about your response. Number 3, to ask yourself, what am I going to learn? And number 4, what will be the best way to make sure they know they can talk to me again? Can I share, Surabhi, there's a practice that I've been developing lately, which is I ask someone, how do you want me to listen? Right? So that I can say, I can be a receptacle for whatever you want to communicate, right? So some people just want to vent and like, wah! Right? And I can receive that. And I think sometimes, you know, from my experience, there is a want and a need to fix or solve, right? And sometimes people don't want anything fixed or solved, right? They just want you to receive what they communicate. You know, so to create a frame like, okay, so how do you want me to listen? Do you want me to listen to receive? Do you want me to listen? Do you want advice? Do you want support? Do you just want to just have an ear? Like, and then just let that be. And I think that bringing that awareness to it, I think creates a container, right? So that then then I know how to listen, right? How they want me to listen, right? How they want me to be in receipt of their communication.
And so that empathy really is about understanding the person or persons with you and allowing that space for them to be understood. And it is a huge skill. And I think for a long time, it was poo-pooed as, you know, a soft skill or what have you. And now if you read kind of management, Harvard Business Review, other things, empathy is a huge skill. And it is a skill that can be learned. And it can be learned by doing some of the things that all of us have identified around listening and about creating the space to listen. So if we move from empathy and we move into N, which is notice. Notice is similar to empathy, but notice requires us to be paying attention to people's patterns, to notice what's going on for somebody. And so my question for you is, what do you do when you notice something is different about someone? So what do you do when you notice something is different about someone? So this could be a colleague, it could be a client, it could be somebody you volunteer with, it could be a friend. Oh, so Ben has this good question. It depends on what I mean by different than how they were behaving. Yes, so this is about their behavioral pattern. It isn't about their hair color. It isn't about something else, but something in the way that they are behaving feels different than a pattern you used to know.
Okay, so we have some, that's a thought-provoking question, Surabhi. So Dr. Kelly said, I lean in. Lorena said, I accept them for the difference. Then we got into what do you mean by different, which was around the behavior, right? Deborah said, I get curious. Susie says to be curious about how that contributes to who they are. Ali says, do whatever I can to make them feel at ease, to try to read what they want. What came to me, what was interesting is when you said the thing about the difference piece, like, I think that there is a way in which our brains are taught to look at difference. And then sometimes when we see difference, we can't take our eyes off of it. Like I become hyper conscious of that difference. Do you know what I mean? And I was like thinking about, you know, I want to be very honest about this because you asked this question, but I remember when I was in high school, like between high school and college, I was in I did a program with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and we were all getting to know each other. And there was a woman who had a different thing in her arm where her arm wasn't fully formed, right? And the question that I asked was, what's the part of yourself that you love the most? That I asked the entire group, right? And then what she said is she named that part of herself. Right? So it was a very interesting thing because the moment I said that, I was like, because I noticed it and I didn't want to draw attention to that. I think that there's this interesting tension that sometimes we're like, am I going to say something? Am I going to mess something up? Am I, you know? But I wanted to draw that because I think that's a different type of noticing, right? And like any help around that would be really helpful.
So I think when I was thinking about notice, I was thinking about things like, maybe there's somebody who always comes to a session, right? Like, I'm sure there are people who are here every week for Fearless sessions. And for 3 weeks, they're not there. And you could say, I noticed that you haven't been there. Just wanted to check in. To me, that kind of noticing is an invitation to a conversation. So I noticed that you're usually on, you're usually on email by X hour. 9 a.m. every day. And recently that hasn't seemed the case. So I think it is that noticing that is an invitation to say, A, I'm paying attention, and B, and not in a creepy way, but I'm paying attention. I care about you. I'm paying attention. And B, I care enough to notice and check that with you. And I think particularly when we're in remote teams and we're away, if there's somebody that you talk to every day, right? I think parents are great at this. My parents call me on the weekend. They're in India, so they call me at between 11 and 12, pretty predictably on a Saturday and a Sunday. And if I don't pick up the phone one of those days, if I don't pick up the second day, then I certainly get we're worried about you. And while I want to say it's beautiful, we're outside, it is them noticing, it is them caring. And I think it is a mark of love in many ways.
I love the, and it is, the term in Spanish is tener detalle, which is to have detail. right? So it's like when, if you're noticing that someone is someone who shows up and they're someone who consistently shows up, like acknowledging that presence and then acknowledging, I haven't seen you, just checking in. And I think what's specifically powerful now is that there are all the various ways that people are navigating the shit show that is happening on the planet, right? And that's the understatement of the century. And I think that there's a beautiful opportunity, I think, to be in that space of checking in and noting and noticing the people around us. Are they showing up or they're not showing up? Are they, this is someone who normally responds to when I share. They're not responding. I wonder if there's something up. And I think it's just that extra level of noting, I think, is really powerful.
I think that goes with the next one, which is about generosity. So we want to be generous with many, many things, right? So I think that piece of noticing and being generous in saying, I noticed this, I want to check in with you, as opposed to making an assumption. So when I think about generosity, I think about things like, how can I be generous today? And I don't necessarily mean opening my wallet every day, but who could I thank? You know, who might I be able to thank for doing a good job? Who might I be able to be generous with? And my question for all of us, and this is a harder one, is how do we start to train ourselves to assume the best in a conversation? And that requires trust. So are there things that we do collectively that require us to think the best? It might be a charitable assumption. And I think this is a counterpoint to thinking about the worst case scenario, right? This person didn't call me back. They clearly don't care about me and they don't care about the work. As opposed to, so that's kind of the worst case. And I think many of us go there, right? Many of us, that's the story we've created in our head. Brene Brown says, like, we create stories in our head. So that's the story that we've created in our head. But we have a choice to be generous in creating the story in our head, which is to say, wow, I wonder if Eduardo's just been buried. Let me check in and say, hey, listen, we were supposed to check in on this. Might there be something going on? So I'm going to be generous. I'm going to invite the conversation, but I'm also not going to go with what I might want to say, which is, why didn't you send me that? So I want us to think about generosity as part of our engagement when we're thinking about building community. We don't know everything that's going on in somebody's life. So we need to be generous with ourselves, for sure, because I've certainly missed deadlines. And if there's somebody on this call who hasn't missed a deadline, I want your system. For real. So we need to be generous. I'm curious what it feels like when you're thanked for something that you did. How does that make you feel? So we'll just put that in the chat. We'll maybe make it a little bit lighter. Seen and appreciated and acknowledged and fantabulous.
I love the invention. Yes, to that fusion, Allie.
Valued.
Yeah.
Right. And this is something that I think we can do without having to open our wallet. It is about being generous of our spirit.
I love the one that says, my language of love is affirmation, and I love when it comes back to me. Yeah. I think it's so powerful to also know that for some people, like actually, like the generosity has many, for some people it's like gifts, for some people it's acknowledgement, for some people it's words of praise, for some people it's quality time, right? So like even for colleagues, it's like understanding the love languages of your colleagues could actually be really helpful in knowing what's going to make the difference, how them actually feel valued and acknowledged. Right? Because you're like, I keep giving them words of praise, but they don't want words of praise. They want gifts. Do you know what I mean? You know, or they want gifts and I keep on giving them words of praise and they're really angry at me. Right?
And you're not going to know unless you ask.
Unless you ask.
Unless you
notice. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is about getting to know folks. So if we move from our generosity and we want to think about asking, which is the next one. So you want to ask. You want to ask. You want to ask yourself some questions. What might you know about this situation? What might you not know about this situation? In a work context, I think about, what are your goals? So ask, what are the goals? What are the goals of this project? What are the goals of this conversation? And asking questions, I think, is curiosity. And asking questions is about getting more information about other people. So what happens for you? What is some of the best questions that people ask you in a work setting when we think about asking that you appreciate? I love this. How can I help you? What are some of the expectations you have of me? Oh, Susie, how are you? And really mean it. Like, wait for the answer.
Deborah, what would you like to communicate right now? Is that for me? What's the best possible thing that could happen at the end of this? I love that. Do you want to talk about this issue? How did you come to that conclusion? I think I wonder sometimes too with the asking, like, I'm curious, Surabhi, if there's like, sometimes as Americans, I feel like sometimes we skirt around the question that we really want to ask, and we ask like micro questions around what we really want to ask to kind of warm it up before we make that ask. How do you feel about, should we just ask the question?
I think so, but I don't think you can ask a question without some of the trust.
Yeah.
Right. So I tell people often who work with me, I ask a lot of questions, and I ask that from a place of curiosity, and it helps me get information. So I also prep them to know that I'm a question asker. Great. Right. So that's part of my generosity, which is to say, here's what it is. And we'll get to it to the last one when we get to the E, that there's another way in which I talk about that. So I think that questions are really generous. I think curiosity is generous. And oftentimes questions and asking those questions shows that you care. So if we go from ask, then we go to growth. So I am at my heart of hearts an educator, and I approach a lot of my life in that way. So I think that growth is important. I think certainly for workplaces and the future of work, organizations and workplaces that are going to focus on learning are going to be better. I think for us as individuals, as employees, as contributors, continuing to learn is going to help future-proof our careers. And we already know that learning is what helps us get into different positions, keep engaged, et cetera, all the way through life. So growth, what does it mean? How can you grow? And I think growth can be really, really, you could think about it in terms of growing your network. So if you're an entrepreneur and you need to grow your network, how can you really do that in a really meaningful way? What does that growth look like? How do you promote growth as part of your process? How do you promote growth as part of your organization? So it could be things like, if we're going to do this project again, how might we do that better? That is growth. How might we get more people at the table? That's growth. So really thinking about that growth. So I want to know from all of you, what is one thing, and I've been really curious about this as people have done this through quarantine, what is one thing that you've been learning or growing at this time? It could be within your community. It could be within your volunteer group. It could be in your office. Is there something, and I think all of us have had to learn and grow and get comfortable with video calls, new ways of doing business. So we've societally,
that's what I wrote.
globally had to be comfortable with it. And there's a learning process.
Wow. And Ben just wrote the ability to sit with total and complete uncertainty about the future. That's a truth. Patience, Veronica shared that. Deborah, reading oracle cards online. Yes, necessity is the mother of invention. Renata, professional branding and business analytics, totally. Creating space for grace in the work setting. Yeah.
So all of this, for me, a lot of it is about growth. So do we think about it in terms of growth? There's certainly lots of research around growth mindset and how we can always see ourselves as being able to change and learn and grow. But there's also just this idea of what might we learn from this? It's a really interesting reframe.
I have a question about growth, Surabhi, because I also feel like with growth, there's pain, right? There's also like struggle, like, you know, when you're growing, when you're exercising, you're tearing muscle and then you're building it up again, you know, and you reach failure. And then we also have a like failure, like with the weight, you know, you want to reach failure, you want to fail, and there's like fail forward, you know, all that other stuff. But failing sucks. Like, and I think that our experience sometimes of growth is that like we want to try, but if we fail, it's also punitive, right? In our work cultures and our work environments. And I'm just curious, like, I think that's one of those things of engaging and creating cultures of belonging is like creating the space where it is okay for people to fail forward, to experiment, to blunder, to fall, you know, and that part of the culture of building that psychological safety and trust is to allow people to feel like you can and you will stumble here, and that's fine, you know, and it's a growth mindset as opposed to just like a stick the landing mindset, I guess.
Yes, and I think that is how are we growing, how are we learning is also about how might we do business differently, what other things could we do that we wouldn't have thought of before, how do we be creative. So all of that is about seeing growth in all of its facets. So yes, you might fail forward, you might learn something new, you might also stumble into something that you never thought of before as a possibility. And I think from talking to thousands of people searching for jobs, one of the reasons people leave is because they have nowhere else to grow and they're bored. And so if an organization, if we as leaders can't create opportunities for people to grow, we may also lose talent.
Yeah. Which leads us to the final
expectations.
letter. Expectations.
Expectations.
Yeah.
So I think that expectations are incredibly, incredibly important because for me, expectations lays visible to the people that you are around, what you expect, what your boundaries are, etc. If Eduardo and I are working together and he has to guess what my expectations are and I have to guess what his are, then we're going to make a lot of mistakes. We might step on each other's toes. Eduardo might say, please don't email me after 7. I might say, I do all my emails after 7. So now what, right? But we wouldn't know that unless we had this conversation. And expectations often feel very scary to people, like they're rules and they're very strict. But I see them as an invitation to know what it is that other people expect from me. And for me to be able to say, here's what I expect, and also here are my boundaries. And so we're going to have a respectful workplace and a culture of belonging where I'm going to know that. So if I'm writing those emails after 7, I'm just going to schedule them to send at a time that Eduardo would like to receive an email. Easy. But I don't know that unless we have this conversation about setting expectations. So I think that transparency around how you want to engage with the people around you in this culture that you're building is really, really important. It also forces us internally to think about our own expectations. And to invite, as a leader, I think you invite that conversation. You know, here are my expectations. What are our collective expectations? Yeah.
It's interesting. Lori just wrote, I love doing designed alliances for any work teams I'm on before we begin. I have no idea what that means. What is a designed alliance? We'll have a conversation about that offline. It sounds like Survivor. It sounds like I want that on my Survivor team. I want a designed alliance.
Totally.
Who knows how to build a fire, you know, and someone who's going to look out for me. I'm curious.
So my question to the group, oh, go ahead.
No. I was going to, the question.
So my question to the group is, have there been times where you have not shared your expectation, and how has that felt?
Mm.
Or another version of that might be somebody else had an expectation that they never told you, and you never knew until there was maybe some conflict. So there's lots of bulldozed, confused, disappointed, and frustrated, like I didn't honor my own boundaries. So I think these expectations that we could set, and I have to say, every summer when I had a group of interns, I would go over expectations that felt like they were common sense. So they were things like, you know, how to dress in a professional office setting, how to, you know, how frequently we want them to check their email, to call us if they're going to be late in coming into the office for whatever reason and let us know. And every year I think, isn't this common sense? And then every year I would think, but now they know, right? So now they know. And I think about this calling in late as a really interesting piece, because we have multiple generations in the workplace. Someone might say, I texted you, I wasn't coming in. So what's the big deal? And you have somebody else who's thinking, I need you to call me and talk to me physically and tell me you're not coming in. And had they not had that conversation, where that conversation could go could be two people really frustrated, bulldozed, some of the other ones in here, disappointed and frustrated, right? It's a smaller issue. Somebody is feeling ill. They shouldn't be in an office, or maybe they need the day off, but you haven't had those conversations about how you want to communicate with one another.
It's so good. You know, I also think about, I love that generational thing where I would offer that millennials may, because so much happens through texting. Do you know what I mean? That it's like whole dating courtships happen before they
and breakups,
even engage like in a personal conversation. Like the whole thing has happened on text. And there's a distinction that I have in some of the words that's a difference between notification and communication, right? So notification is like, you notified me, you sent me an email, you posted on Facebook, you sent an Instagram message, like that was a notification that was actually not a conversation. Like a conversation is actually two human beings, like, or multiple human beings actually engaged in a dialogue. Like that's a conversation, not a notification, right? And I think that like having that type of distinction, or like sharing that as an expectation, I think provides clarity. And then now we know what the rules are to play, right? Otherwise, everyone's kind of like squandering in their own ideas of, you know, assumptions and biases and what they want, like what they think the rules are and the other stuff. So yeah. I'm curious, you know, is there anyone that has, we have time for like maybe one or two questions for Surabhi. Is there anyone that, you know, from this engage landscape has a question that's emerged? Again, empathy, notice, generosity, ask, growth, and then expectations. Anything top of mind? Dr. Kelly Jennings.
Thank you, Eduardo. It makes me laugh to hear you call my name like that.
I love it. I love Dr. Kelly Jennings from Planet Earth. There she is.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I so want to create a culture of belonging. I have been in private practice for 13 years, and so and have built up a lot of success in that practice, and have patients that I really care about. So there's this. I'm aware that I can feel really precious about what I've built, and I've had a number of assistants through the years. And it's difficult for me to hand over something that I'm not sure this person cares as much about as I do, you know, or even like these these relationships that are very dear to me that have been built with patients. You know, I can hear my assistant being too casual maybe on the phone and kind of cringing. And so I'm so yearning to create a culture of belonging, and I also want to know how to kind of massage that part of myself so I can loosen up a bit.
I think that you're not alone for many founders and people who have started their own business, because so much of the business is you. So much of the business is you. So I think one of the things that maybe is helpful is setting out those expectations, right? So here's how, and maybe modeling some of that in your phone example. You know, this is how we want to treat our patients, and we want to treat our patients or our clients like this because we want them to feel welcome. We want them to feel supported, respected, whatever the word is. I do think some of it is about the expectations, and some of it is about letting people grow. And so it means it's not always going to be done in exactly the same way as you would do it. And I think that takes generosity of yourself, of saying, okay, I'm going to be generous in this situation. And this is part of building a community of people around me. Not everybody is going to do it the way I do. Yeah. It's not easy.
Yeah, thank you.
If there's room for if one more person has a question or something, we have space for that. So Surabhi, I'm gonna call us complete. So Yancy has to go. Thank you so much, Yancy, for being here. Elevated Sparkulations, Surabhi Lal. I wanted to share, because we've been using the word conversation several times in here, and I had a friend of mine who framed this once for me, which was a revolution in looking at the word. That the word conversation shares the same root word as the word to convert or conversion. And sometimes what we think is we feel like we enter into a conversation to convert the other person, right? However, like to enter into a space of conversion, I have to be willing to give up what I believe as well. So like a true conversation is a real giving up of whatever I have to actually be fully present in the moment, to be with what the other human being is similarly offering me in this moment. Anyway, that just resonated with me as I was speaking to you about the opportunity to be empathic, to notice, to be generous, to ask, to grow, you know, is to also be in that space of allowing ourselves to actually just really being listening, you know, for the humanity that's emerging in front of us through that lens.
I think for me, the other piece of this is why I made it engage, is because it takes effort. So we can't engage in something, you know, if we engage in something and we don't put our effort and our real intention behind doing it and effort behind doing it, it's not going to work. And building communities takes that. Building cultures of belonging takes that level of engagement and work.
Yes, I think that's the mic drop. That's the mic drop, Surabhi Lal. That's how we end it. Thank you so much for joining us for Fearless Chat 25. Thank you much, Surabhi. Thank you so much, Surabhi. Our chat on Thursday is actually a Juneteenth celebration. We are celebrating Black women and their stories. We have an amazing group of storytellers that we're going to be showcasing. And the invitation is to come with your own stories of liberation. It is in partnership with Luminary, where Surabhi also serves as Chief Impact Officer. We're going to have an opportunity. We're going to be listening to several storytellers share stories of liberation. We're going to move into breakout rooms. And then in smaller spaces, we'll have an opportunity to build communities and share our own stories of liberation in smaller community. And then we'll all come back together at the end, and some people may feel super courageous and super fearless to share their stories of liberation collectively. So that's on Thursday. We are accepting donations for that event. So it is a donation event. You can donate $1, $5, $10, $50, however much you feel. All of the proceeds will go to the Dooney Fund, which is an organization that's supporting Black women entrepreneurs. They've given over 500 microgrants to Black women entrepreneurs. So that's also an opportunity to align our principles and our postings to activism, right? And actually showing our commitment to empowering the ideas and the brain capital and the sweat equity and the power of Black women entrepreneurs and business owners. So that is our commitment, that's Luminary's commitment, and that is our community's commitment. So thank you so much for that. And then we have a series of Fearless Chats that will emerge afterwards. We're going to be moving to 1 a week. So whereas we've been doing 2 a week, as we move now into July, we're going to be doing them only on Thursdays. And I also want to pocket for people to get that July 2nd is Fearless Communicators' 5th birthday party. So we're going to have a birthday party for Fearless Communicators turning 5 years. And Surabhi, we have your email address if people have questions to reach out for you. And if you'd like to connect with her, and also we'll also put this in the email that people send. If they write the word engage, you have a tool that you will be sharing with them, which is a PDF that has a much more thorough kind of breakdown of all the different pieces of that. So with that, we are complete, and we have a final exercise that we do here with Fearless Communicators. So if you have to go, we totally get that we're 3 minutes overtime. And if you're able to stay for another moment or two, there's a completion exercise that we have here. And if you are able to be on video, it's very helpful to see you. And if not, then we are able to unmute. Okay, great. So it's a very simple acknowledgement exercise. What we're going to do is we are going to see someone, you're going to name them, and then you're going to say thank you. And then that person is going to choose somebody else on the call, and they're going to see them and thank them. And then the invitation is for everyone to raise their hand so that once you go, we know that you get to pick someone else whose hand is raised. Okay. And Deborah and Jessica, you are in the space, but I don't have you on video, so we can't see you. Okay. So Sarita Winthrop, I see you, and thank you.
I just want to acknowledge Surabhi and say thank you so much. I really enjoyed this so much. And what do I do after that?
And say thank you.
Thank you so much, Surabhi. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarita. Ben, I see you and I thank you.
Luana, I see you and I thank you.
Susie, I see you and I thank you.
Susie, you are muted.
Lori, I see you and I thank you.
Thank you. Allie, I see you and I thank you. Thank you, Surabhi, as well.
Eduardo, I see you and I thank you so much.
Karen, not that Karen. I see you and I thank you.
Oh. Lorena, I see you and I thank you.
I think Deborah's left. Deborah, I see you and I thank you.
Thank you. Jessica, I see you and I thank you.
And if not, then Deborah, you have the all skate.
Okay, everybody, I see you all, even though I can't. Throughout that conversation, all the cameras went away. But anyway, I'm with you in spirit. I can hear you all. I love you all. Thank you for being on the call. Big love. I see you and I thank you all.
And just a final moment, just to acknowledge in our Fearless community, our Fearless Force family, we do have our elder, Sarita, present. Sarita is the elder of all of our Fearless Force women in that program. Sarita is our elder. So Sarita Winthrop, I'm going to ask you specifically, are we complete? Are we done?
We are complete, and thank you so much, Eduardo. Was it
Yes, it's so great to have you here, Sarita. Mwah. Thank you all so much. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday to celebrate Juneteenth. Yes. Bye. Bye.